Hi, everybody. It's Randy Ray, the Literate Texan. This is my Booktrek 2025 announcement video. The Literate Texan is my channel where I talk about literature, books, highbrow, lowbrow, everywhere in between. And Booktrek is an event that was created by Revenant and Vin Reeds to celebrate Star Trek literature. And in terms of franchise literature with lots of books, you'll be hard pressed to find a franchise bigger than Star Trek because, first of all, the show was around from the 60s onward, but they started doing serious Star Trek publishing of books in the 1980s. And they still publish Star Trek books. There's a lot of editorial guidelines now so that you get sort of, I don't know, maybe a cookie cutter approach. But anyway, let me talk about the event first, okay? The event takes place in June, July, and August, okay? And it's dead simple to participate. All you have to do is read a Star Trek book. That's it. It can be from any of the series. It could even be a nonfiction book about one of the actors or one of the nonfiction books about the creation of the show. I think it's more fun to read one of the novels, but that's up to you. I'm planning to read several novels. You can come up with your own themes. There's plenty of ways to do that since there's such a wide variety of books in the Star Trek series. This year, also, if you want an away mission, don't read something Star Trek at all. Read a book about actual science. You can do one or two of those too. So, and we've got all summer long to do this, so it's very easy to squeeze it in with certain other events. And sometimes you'll even have books that will overlap. For example, there's one of these Star Trek novels, I believe it's Ishmael, which has an Old West setting. So it could also count for June on the Range, which is another event that's coming up this summer. But this is going to be my approach, to the summer of Trek, or actually, I think this isn't the summer of Trek. It's in search for Booktrek, or in search of Booktrek. I can't remember which. Last year was the Wrath of Booktrek, so it would make sense for this year to be the Search for Booktrek, but someone named it In Search of Booktrek, which is also appropriate too, because Leonard Nimoy hosted a TV show called In Search of during the 1970s when Star Trek wasn't on. But this is going to be my approach this year, and this is just my approach. Okay, I approach Star Trek with a certain amount of nostalgia from my childhood. I grew up watching reruns of Star Trek in the 1970s and then also in the 1980s. And I also grew up reading a lot of the pocketbook novels from the 1980s and the 1990s. So I'm restricting my reading this year to Star Trek novels from I've got it written down here, in fact, from about 1981 to 1994. That's the time frame that just happened to fall apart and happened to fall into. And I've got Star Trek novels kind of categorized in there too. Pocketbooks, they were really aggressive with the amount of Star Trek fiction they were publishing. And it wasn't even called the original series then because they didn't come out with The Next Generation until quite a bit after they started publishing these books. But they were really aggressive with their publication schedule. I believe they came out with a book a week for a very, very long time. And they numbered the novels. They're generally pretty short too. And so, the first category that I'm going to look at, and all of these that I've got, I downloaded off the Kindle. Quite a few of them were available as part of Kindle Unlimited. But you can see this is my folder for Booktrek 2025. And you'll notice that one of these looks different than the others. This is The Voyage of the Space Beagle by A. van Vogt is the author's name. And this is an old science fiction novel that was hugely influential on Star Trek. In fact, what I read was, and I don't know how accurate it is or not, but I read that the creators of The Voyage of the Space Beagle even thought about suing the makers of Star Trek because there were such similarities. So I was curious about that. But that comes before the 1981 Star Trek books, and it's more of a curiosity thing for me than anything else. But, the first book that I have actually on my list here that's actually a Star Trek book is, let's see here. I thought I had, and I don't have it. Oh, okay, Star Trek The Entropy Effect is the first one that I have here. And Star Trek The Entropy Effect is pretty notable because the pocketbooks begin with the novelization of Star Trek The Motion Picture, okay, which I don't want to read again, okay? I don't think it was such a great book. It was It was written by Gene Roddenberry, who created the franchise, but it didn't seem to feel like Star Trek to me at all. The Entropy Effect was number 2 in the pocketbook series. Here's the cover art for this particular edition. But this would make it the first Star Trek novel in the pocketbook series, which would make it really foundational and influential in how they did things moving forward. And obviously, Spock was the breakout character for the original series, so you'll see a lot of Spock on the cover art of these. But that's going to be the first one that I read this summer. And I've got a list of probably 11 or 12. I'm going to try to read about one a week over the summer. But also after that, you can see I've got notes here, and you can see I'm squinting at them. I've got some vision problems these days. But the next book on my list is called Yesterday's Sun. And let's see, this is also a Spock Central novel, and it involves time travel, which of course is a classic Trek trope. And it has to do with, this is part of the Yesterday Saga, which by A.C. Crispin. A.C. Crispin was writing, or eventually wrote several novels in the Star Trek universe related to Spock and the Vulcans. But this involves a story from the animated series that eventually involves Star Trek having a son. None of these books are canon, by the way. They're all just out there doing whatever they want. But so that's Yesterday's Sun. That's going to be the next one that I read this summer. And I'm not reading the first paragraphs of these like I usually do in these kinds of videos, because they're just not really that kind of novel. And then after Yesterday's Sun, I'm going to follow that up with Time for Yesterday, which is also part of the same series. It's got a really cool cover, I think, because it's got Spock in the front, but then there's a Vulcan on some kind of horse-looking creature jumping through some kind of portal there. I don't know if it's a time travel portal or what, but it looks really cool. These are books that I haven't read yet. And this one was number 21 or something in the numbered series. So that covers quite a bit of time just in those. But those to me are kind of like the foundational works of the Star Trek fiction of the time. They kind of set the tone for the rest of the series. And then I'm going to segue from there into these more ambitious literary Star Trek novels, some of which I've read and some of which I haven't. One of these has special memory for me. I worked at Long John Silver's in the late 1980s, early 1900s, the late 1980s, 1988, 1989. I had a boss there. I didn't really get along with her very well until she learned that I, like her, was a Star Trek fan. And she had a particular Star Trek book that was her favorite that I had not read. It was called Star Trek Uhura's Song, a novel by Janet Kagan. And you can see there's a cat on the cover of it. Now, I don't know much about this, but I understand that it has something to do with Uhura being able to relate to these cat-like aliens. And this particular assistant manager at this store that didn't like me, she was a cat person, but she was also a Star Trek novel person. So this was perfect for her. She just loved it. And so when she found out that I was into this too, we had something to relate them on, and we got along great after that. It's really funny how things like that work in life, you know. You find a common interest, but anyway, this has got a lot to do with the philosophy, world building, you know, creating an interesting alien race that Uhura could relate to. That's going to be the next one on my list. And then my favorite from the time, which I read at the time, and I understand it's really great for everybody that reads it, is called Strangers from the Sky. And a lot of these books didn't necessarily focus as closely on the original series characters as the later books, where they've got a lot of editorial oversight. And this one in particular, Strangers from the Sky, has a whole story in here about first contact with the Vulcans. And it's very, very different from what we eventually saw on screen. It's non-canon, but there was a lot of philosophical stuff in here about how the Vulcans think. And anyway, really, really great book. And it had to do with, I don't remember it that well. It's going to be like reading a new novel for me almost. But I know it also has to do a lot with Spock's ancestry here on Earth, because, you know, Spock was half human. That's Strangers from the Sky. And then the latest one in that series of the real philosophical ones is called Star Trek Sarek, which could be confusing for some people because there was an episode of The Next Generation that was also titled Sarek. But this is another one by A.C. Crispin. But this Sarek novel involves Kirk and Spock having an adventure with Sarek. The Next Generation episode, obviously, that was titled Sarek, involved Sarek's relationship and adventures with Captain Picard, which came much later. over 100 years later in the context of the series. But I don't know that you would have had one without the other. And then we've also got The Wounded Sky, which I understand was originally going to be a screenplay of its own and inspired certain other screenplays for the next generation. They just modified the story a little bit, but here's the art for that. I love the title, Wounded Sky. This particular machine occasionally turns off on me at random. The buttons aren't necessarily in exactly the right place anymore. I'm going to get a new one eventually, but yeah, I really like the cover art on this one, so I'm trying to pull it back up again. There it is, The Wounded Sky. Why isn't that brighter than that? I don't know. What's going on here? The Wounded Sky, next on the list. Novel by Diane Duane. It's another one of the numbered Star Trek novels, but I'm pretty excited about it, to tell you the truth. And it keeps turning off on me. Okay, so The Wounded Sky, I'm going to follow that up with Spock's World. You know, like I say, he was the breakout character, and I think Spock's World might have been an exploration of Vulcan thought back before, you know, they did a lot of that on screen. And I believe it was also by A.C. Crispin, who was kind of the writer of Vulcan novels. But I kind of like the artwork on that one, too. It's kind of a nice shot of Spock there. So yeah, and those are your more philosophical, big idea novels. And then some of these novels are really kind of absurd or overlooked or been forgotten. And I wanted to get into some of those too, because they're a little more whimsical and take themselves a little less seriously. Or sometimes maybe they do take themselves seriously, but they didn't actually become part of the canon. One of these was... I can't read that. It says The Final Reflection. Okay, The Final Reflection is an examination of the Klingon society, but it's a very different Klingon society than we eventually got on the TV series. But there it is, and it has a chess theme also. So yeah, there's a chess match in there. You notice on the cover too, that might be a young Spock, but it might just be some Vulcan of some kind. I don't think the actual characters from the original series play a big role in this, but I haven't read this one yet either. I'm looking forward to it. It was written by John Ford, who was a famous science fiction writer of the time and really wanted to put his stamp on things. But it was influential. These are all from the mid-90s, by the way. Dwellers of the Crucible is next on my list here. And where is it on here? Dwellers. Well, maybe it's not even on the list. I thought I had it on here. Yeah, okay, so we've got, we're going to skip right past that one because I can't find it. And then I looked disorganized, but I actually took notes and everything. We've also got Ishmael, which is sort of a Star Trek Western, apparently, judging from the cover of it here. It looks really cool. I love the artwork. I'm already doing a bunch of stuff for Booktrek, but this could easily be counted as... There you go. You can see those guys are dressed like they're in the Old West playing card games and stuff. It looks really cool. I love that suit on Spock. I imagine he's pretty good at gambling during the Old West, too. That's certainly how he would have been portrayed in the books, even though I haven't read it yet. So, yeah, that's another one on the list. Like I say, all of these are from the 80s. This is a real nostalgia trip for me. That was Ishmael. And then we get into the real fun ones, the ones that are kind of pulpy and real actiony and stuff. My favorite of these, and I have read it, and I've read it multiple times, is called Doctor's Orders, which is a great play on words. But if you can guess, Doctor's Orders is a book where McCoy gets to be in charge of the Enterprise for a while. And it looks at how his command style would be very different from Spock's or Scotty's or Captain Kirk's because he's a doctor. So he's going to come at commanding a starship from that perspective. I remember it being a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to revisiting it. How Much for Just the Planet? I believe this is a Harry Mudd novel. Harry Mudd was one of the only recurring villains on the show, and he was kind of a comedic character. But this one, How Much for Just the Planet? That's worlds apart. That's different. This might have been the one I was looking for earlier that I couldn't find. Sure is. Yeah, worlds apart. This looks good. How Much for Just the Planet? This is also by John M. Ford, and you see you got a Klingon on the cover here too. This one's going to be a lot of fun. I don't know, maybe it does. Yeah, I think that's Harry Mudd in the middle there. But yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun and pretty exciting. And then finally, The last one on here is from 1994. It's called Star Trek Federation. And by now, of course, the Next Generation is a real thing and it's a big deal. But this is another one. It's got a nice little cover there. This isn't the original cover, but the original cover was really ugly. This was written by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens, who really seem to understand the lore behind Star Trek better than just about anybody. But they co-wrote a lot of the Shatnerverse novels, which is what I tend to read during the summer of Trek. But this year, no Shatnerverse novels. This is all 1980s, revisiting the pocketbook era. But Federation has two adventures going on in it that eventually collide. And it's an original series adventure that eventually collides with the Next Generation adventure. And I read it when it came out. I don't remember it very well, but I do remember being a little let down that Kirk and Picard don't actually meet or interact. They just they're like two shadows passing in the night or something. So that's what I have planned for my summer of Trek. But I'm really curious if you've got some kind of themes or interesting stuff that you're doing with your summer of Trek. Are you just reading modern Trek novels? You know, some people might just read Voyager novels. Some people might just read Next Generation novels. Some people might mix it up. I don't know what you're planning to do. I'm a big fan of Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and Dr. McCoy. So that's what I'm going to be reading. And so that's the great thing about Booktrek is there's literally hundreds of books to choose from multiple series. And also, whether you like, you know, optimistic science fiction or dystopian science fiction, there's room for you in the Star Trek universe, because the original Star Trek that I grew up on was very optimistic. It basically said no matter how bad things are now, they do eventually get better. But that was Roddenberry's vision of the future. The newer Trek, the stuff that Kurtzman is putting on the air now, is almost just the opposite. It's almost pessimistic about the future. It's like you think things are bad now, they're going to get worse. So yeah, if you're into that sort of thing, more power to you. That's not my cup of tea, especially when it comes to Star Trek. But anyway, that is my announcement video for Booktrek 2025. And, you know, I'm going to list the co-hosts down in the description section here. There's quite a few of us that are on the bridge crew, so to speak. And until my next video, I just want to remind you, stay hydrated. It's really important. And stay sexy, folks. I'll be back with another video soon.